Yeah, let's do an intro. So, Carlos, could you tell us a bit about yourself? Where you write, what do you do, and where you come from?
Okay, so I'm Carlos. I'm part of the
Peter.
Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and I'm an IT professional. Married. I've been married for 5 years now. Uh, Dad to two kids, ages 4 and 2, and another one on the way this January. Right. So so yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
So Andreas, and then we'll move to Pedro.
Yeah, I'm Andreas. I come from Germany. I'm Catholic, that just last year refound his faith, and I'm a care worker. Yeah, not much else to say. I'm also on the Bridges of Meaning Discord community.
That's an interesting profession in the midst of COVID. We'll have to ask you about that. So, what about you, Pedro? Oh no, sorry. Yeah, Pedro.
I'm Pedro. I'm a Portuguese. I live in Portugal. I am a medical oncologist. And I'm a contributor for the website Where Peter Is, that has been dedicated to defending Pope Francis. So I'm Catholic, and a part-time writer.
Yeah, and you're one of the most prolific writers over where Peter is, I think. And is there anybody who writes more articles than you do?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't keep count, but I have my ups and downs. There are sometimes when I write a lot, and then there are some times in which I don't write almost anything. So it comes and goes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and my name is Julian. I come from Canada, and I'm the only non-Catholic in this conversation. I'm a Potterite, which is sort of a Anabaptist group, and I just find myself in a weird situation where I end up, sort of almost defending Pope Francis against Catholic critics on on YouTube. It's the strangest thing. So I was interested in getting this conversation together, and getting into some of the critiques of Francis. Maybe look at some of what motivates the traditionalists to criticize Francis. See what's going on there, and just sort of explore this whole topic with all of you. So does anyone have something to start off with? A topic we want to start off with? There's so much to discuss.
So as part of I think there's one thing we're missing with the intros, Julian. But what is this Bridges of Meaning Discord for just for the? I mean, obviously we're gonna post it on our channel, and everyone would know what that is. But just to give Pedro an idea, we are basically a community online that came together. All of us more or less were interested in the ideas of. I would say it starts off with Jordan Peterson, right? The Canadian psychologist, who I think put together a compelling argument for religion from the point of view of. I mean, there are a lot of things with Jordan Peterson, and we can talk for hours about it. But basically, he allowed religion to sneak back in to the conversation where everything is so secularized and scientific. He made an argument that from an evolutionary perspective, this is how religion actually fits into all of that. How it could come up from the bottom up. So and then there's this American pastor. He's a Calvinist pastor named Paul Vanderklay, who started posting videos, commentary videos, conversation videos around this topic. And so, the magic of YouTube algorithm and and everything meant that some of us probably saw his videos on our suggestions, clicked it, thinking this is probably more clickbaity stuff, taking advantage of Jordan Peterson's popularity. But it turned out that he was posting some pretty interesting and relevant commentaries on Western culture, Christianity, and how all of that fits in. And he's a small church pastor. So what he did was he started talking to people, posting some of these conversations online, just one-on-one, like pastoral. I mean, I guess you can even think of it in Catholic terms as kind of spiritual direction sort of material. And that got everybody's attention. So so then you now have dozens of people trying to contact him. He no longer has time to do all of that because he's just one guy. And so some of the community members who were very near him physically decided, hey, let's start this Discord server, right? Where all of these people who are trying to get in touch with you might be able to try to get in touch with Paul van der Clay, might want to start talking to each other and not have to rely on one person to mediate all of these people's ideas and stories. Yeah, so that's what the Bridges of Meaning Discord are. That's how Julian and Andreas and I have met. So we've not like met physically, although I hope one day that happens, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure one day it'll happen, but I hope it'll happen before the resurrection.
One day it happens.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what that is, right? So
Andreas, you had some interesting comments about the potential connection between, the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon, the way he sort of does this bottom-up evolutionary psychology argument, and how that's sort of often tied up with a certain perspective on the culture war, a certain sort of ends up sort of defending Western civilization. And you sort of wondered if there's a connection there between this and maybe the some of the criticism around Pope Francis. Would you like to discuss that a bit? Is that a good angle to jump in here?
Oh, that's a whole can of worms, I think. Let me see if I can bring it together. So this whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon started with this C16 bill, which got stark reactions from the culture, and many people got this. I am pretty sure Pedro is familiar with the term of the red pill.
Yes.
And this red pill phenomenon is like, it's people who live, mostly people who live in this secular, mainly media propagated left-wing liberal bubble, and that pushed people out of a constrained vision, without making any value judgment about that. But it opened up many, how did you say?
You're sort of saying it sort of introduces them to a more right-wing perspective and so on.
Yeah, and a lot of it starts also with Jonathan Haidt in a way, through Paul van der Clay, who also brought Jonathan Haidt into the conversation, where we got in the culture this kind of dualism, where everything, the right wing people are the stupid people, the rednecks stereotype or something like that, which gets propagated mainly by media culture, modern media, popular culture. I think that's also part of the problem of modernity. Well, as I said, whole can of worms. But through that, through Jordan Peterson a lot, and through his biblical lectures, because I think that's the important thing, is how they brought religion back into discussion, because he comes from a Jungian perspective, and he made an evolutionary argument for religion. Many people started rediscovering the value of religion, and particularly Christianity. And since this is sort of an internet phenomenon, you also get this, I don't know how to say it.
A bit of a bubble or something, is that what you're getting at there? Not sure.
Yeah, you live in the bubble. I'm sorry. I try to articulate that.
Yeah, maybe the sort of how these internet cultures sort of tend to, create these bubbles that sort of have these negative feedback loops, in group, out group, and
yes.
And is that sort of what you're getting at, that type of internet phenomenon?
I mean, to bring it to the general topic we wanted to discuss, which is mainly the papacy of Pope Francis, is like this. You have these, especially in the Anglosphere, this extremely one-sided vision because of certain cultural hegemonies in this, I would say, the online Catholicosphere, which pushes people which has a certain draw to people who are
caught in this sort of liberal bubble.
Who are caught in this red pill phenomenon to rediscover their faith through in another bubble, basically.
Yeah, it's great. So I don't know, Pedro, do you have anything to sort of connect what Andreas is describing here and some of the things you've noticed, and you're telling me you could sort of see how these currents sort of start out within the church and in the broader culture. Could you speak to those dynamics?
Yeah. This situation and the dichotomy that we see in the church today between those who are supportive of Pope Francis and those who are critical of him. This actually started already centuries ago, because one aspect of Catholic theology that, for the viewers who are not Catholic, that this is important, is that Catholicism has a big emphasis on continuity, doctrinal continuity, because there's this idea that if the church taught something wrong, and when I say wrong, it's very wrong, morally wrong, in the past, then the church cannot be a guide, a reliable guide in the present. So the church tries to show always, when there is some kind of doctrinal development, the church tries to show this continuity. And what happened is that since the French Revolution, the church saw lost some kind of influence on society, and the church saw the emergence of very, very anti-clerical regimes, things that we today hardly don't have, except probably in the Middle East. But I'm talking about modern political movements in places that were originally quite Catholic. So the church answered these movements by condemning them, and it did okay, they'd right, because some of these movements were very even bad. Okay, the French Revolution, for all the benefits that it had, well, they also had the terror. They guillotined thousands of people, and then they soon forgot all those high values of fraternity, solidarity, blah, blah, blah. They soon forgot all of those values and started killing people in a way that was no better than religious people. So the church was scared of those movements, and with quite reason, because those movements were very hostile to the church. So during 200 years or so, the church had the hostile, adversarial posture regarding modernity. Now, afterwards, what happened was some of these movements, ideological movements, had their zenith during the two world wars, especially the second. And the world that emerged afterwards was quite different. But the church was still losing influence. And so there was a council that was convoked, the Second Vatican Council. An ecumenical council is one of the highest, most authoritative bodies in Catholic theology. And what happened was that the church fathers at the time decided that they wanted a different strategy. Instead of simply condemning and saying, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, they said, okay, the modern world is now completely different from what we where we emerged. They have Catholic roots, but they are not Catholic, so it doesn't do any good to just reiterate, okay, you're not following Catholic teaching because of this or this or this. Doesn't do any good. So let's try to find points of connection and contact between the modern society. We take what is good and we reject what is evil, but let's emphasize what is good, what we have in common, to build together. This is actually quite a traditional principle. The church has been doing this since early times. We don't reject the pagans or the philosophy of the pagans. We filter it, okay? But many people saw that the council, they thought there was a discontinuity with what happened before. So the church suddenly had embraced, so supposedly, so they say, the errors that it had condemned before. And this is from where the dichotomy comes from. After the Second Vatican Council, there came some other popes whose job was primarily to consolidate the Second Vatican Council. Since there had been such a shift in posture, they had to rediscover how to be a church after the Vatican Council. But Francis is the first pope to have been ordained after the Second Vatican Council. And he embodies this perspective of, let's meet those who are imperfect, those who do not share 100% our values. Let's meet them where they are and then bring them, not through proselytism, just moralizing, but through attraction, by showing them a Christian model in how Christ transforms us. So he is the embodiment of this new perspective. Of course, people who still are attracted to the former perspective will see in Pope Francis the embodiment of the church of discontinuity. And most of the criticisms come from there. Of course, there's lots of culture wars in the middle. Many politics, nowadays, American politics have been influencing Catholicism worldwide, and there is this idea you're either with us or against us. And since Pope Francis seems to lean kind of left-wing in certain social issues, which is not true. The other popes also did the same, but he seems to have a greater emphasis on those. Seems, actually. I think that what happens is that the other popes, their message was actually kind of smothered, but I can get to that later on. So he is cataloged. There's an us versus them mentality. And if Pope Francis is not for us politically, he's one of them. And since them are always heretical or heterodox, then Pope Francis is by extension heterodox. It's kind of a very unnuanced, tribalistic view of religion that doesn't take into consideration that Catholicism will always will always go beyond the boundaries of any political ideology. Just like we incorporate what is good and what is bad, we try to get the good from the right wing and the good from the left wing and reject what is bad. But people think that they have to adhere to all the principles of an ideological party, and it's not just in the right, also in the left, and shape the Catholic Church according to those political ideologies, instead of being fully Catholic and trying to shape their parties at the image of church social doctrines. So those, I think, are the roots of the tension that we see nowadays.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you guys have anything to respond here? I have a few thoughts for sure. Carlos?
Right. So, I'm my family is not, shall we say, particularly devout Catholic. I mean, the usual cultural Catholic stuff that I'm sure Pedro is familiar with. Weddings, funerals, Christmas and Easter, and maybe on your birthday, or if you feel like especially holy today, you go to mass. And I attended basically what they call the UC Berkeley of the Philippines. So, and ironically enough, refound my faith there. Right? So because funnily enough, my university had a Catholic parish in it, and right in front of that there was a Protestant church. So inside the campus, right? So I ended up finding myself in the confessional after not attending mass at all for like 4 years. So this was way back in the day. And the thing is, it's not one thing I've noticed since Andreas mentioned that this is large an online phenomenon of people trapped. Like you have people in this like mainstream media bubble, which are very influenced by left-wing perspectives, and then you go online, and there are these other bubbles that are fighting against this bubble. I would dare call it all of them bubbles, right? And they have more of a right-wing bent to them. But look, I want to give credit where credit is due, and I would say that definitely the mainstream discussion is very, very leftist, liberal, whatever you call it. I'm using American categories really, which I'm not all that fond of, but because I'm not American, I don't think it quite fits. But okay, let's go with that. So most of my formation, or prior to landing in the confessional, was reading a bunch of articles online about what the church believes, like the what's in the catechism, right? Because I didn't have anyone like offline to talk about this with, except for a couple of people, I guess, right? So who are not really, I would say, super close friends with me. so what happens is like you get sucked into this online space where, and they have a point, after Vatican II, the liturgy is terrible. Yeah, it largely is, so and what I mean by terrible is that, yeah, they totally have a point, but yeah, they have a point. You go to your parish, the homilies are bland, the and I've not really seen anything like the clown mass or any of those really egregious liturgical abuses, but you see people there who are there not taking their job seriously. Sometimes the priest even, but most of the time it's just that, okay, there's going to be a choir, but the mass is going to start, they're not going to be there, or they're just going to be two guys, and then the rest of the choir comes in late, and then they don't sing very well, and they have not set up the sounds properly, so like nobody's taking this seriously. Like, this is mass, guys. This is mass. The most important thing in the world, and the people who are participating in it don't seem to be taking it seriously. And then you encountered these groups online, these traditionalists, who, like I said, they've got a point. All of these things over here that's happening here are really happening, right? And they're going to be the ones with the fancy vestments, the incense. And then I actually found myself, look, I never identified myself as a traditionalist, because funnily enough, I used to attend daily Tridentine Mass just because I was neighbors with the Tridentine Mass for a good couple of years, right? So it was like logistical convenience more than anything, right? So I never really like identified myself as part of that group. I would say I have some pretty traditional leanings, but I don't really seek out a Tridentine Mass and stuff like that. But they do have a point, and then you're this guy whose experience of Christianity and the Catholic faith is mostly in the online space, whose formation is through YouTube channels, through websites and fora that are discussing these things, telling you about all of the. I mean, again, the liturgy wars is just one aspect of it. And then you go to your parish and said, yeah, these guys are right. I may not be seeing the clown mass, but the choir comes in late. Like, why is that? Nobody's even taking this seriously, right? And you go to the Tridentine Mass, and they do everything properly, right? By the book, vestments, incense, everyone's kneeling when they're supposed to, everyone's standing when they're supposed to, everyone's seated when they're supposed to, right? And you're going to compare both of those and think, look, maybe the church did go off the rails after Vatican II, or if not after Vatican II, after the liturgy reforms were instituted, right? So that was quite a while ago for me. That was nearly a decade ago. Maybe Andreas has something to do. You're a more recent revert, so maybe have some ideas about that.
Well, mostly first I didn't even know. I mean, I live in Germany, so depending, we are generally regarded as very like left Catholic, progressive Catholic, which is true in many degrees, but well, and I just made that point like recently in Germany, like everybody goes to communion, but nobody goes to confession, which is so completely opposite of this what you when you hear these almost sometimes legalistic expressions you get when you get catechized through YouTube, basically. So and you get into this nominalist thinking, and I think Mike Lewis once made that point in one of his podcasts. This gas tank Catholicism. This idea, I have to keep my gas tank full, and every time I commit a mortal sin, the gas tank is empty, so now I have to go to confession, so it's full again. And in a way, I really thought that was appealing. I mean, that there was an appeal to it. It gave some certainty, some clear rules to follow, which is good for a German because we like rules. So, which is weird because you don't get that at Mass. So, because basically nobody knows the rules. So there is a draw in that in that view, taking things seriously, basically.
I would just like to add something. It's true that Vatican II gave rise to the so-called Liturgy Wars between those who preferred the Mass as it was before and the ones who preferred the new Mass. There is that also idea that the new Mass is less reverent, but all of that is true. But I think that Pope Francis did not add significantly to that war. Because even though it's obvious that Francis has a less optimistic view of the Tridentine Latin Mass, the traditional Mass, it's also true that Francis has celebrated many of those traditional Masses. I think that the opposition, so Francis did not add or subtract anything to the Liturgy Wars. What we see as far as conflict and criticism of Pope Francis comes, it's doctrine, teaching.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So it's the clash between this perspective of those who think if the modern world gives you something and it's wrong, you must reject it outright based on that wrong thing. Or if the world has something wrong, but there's also something good, you try to build on the good. Okay, and of course reject the evil, but not constantly hammering on it. It's the clash between these two perspectives, and that's the clash between the papal critics and Pope Francis. Not the liturgy. That was many years ago, many decades ago. Of course, then there's an identification of the new papal critics with the old critics of the Vatican II, and then they migrate to traditional masses, which can also be problematic because we risk having masses that are very good and rigorous in a liturgical point of view, but then there's no a significant portion of the congregation may not have a connection to the head of the church, and that's also problematic. But of course, this does not mean that everyone that is a traditionalist is against Pope Francis, not at all. But as this migration from papal critics to the traditional Mass keeps moving forward, this problem may exacerbate, because as I said, people also tend to get things in an all or nothing situation. So there's this tribalistic point of view, and Pope Francis is bad. The critics are good, according to them. The critics go to traditional Latin Mass, so the traditional Latin Mass is good. That's that's the kind of reasoning that we are dealing with at this moment. We should, I think that to grasp the problem, we need to go to the root of Pope Francis' teachings and his attitude towards modern world, because many of his critics were adherents of the Vatican II Council before Pope Francis.
So there's so many connections for me here. I mean, I think, Andreas, you started off this conversation by pointing to this sort of red pill reaction to, sort of liquid modernity, and, how this sort of modern culture seems to sort of be unrooted from tradition, and people are sort of feeling this sense of loss of deeper meaning. And then sort of someone like Jordan Peterson comes along and he has this whole framework of thinking where he says, these ancient religious stories, they ground you deeply in the past, and you have these archetypes within you, and you can follow this hero's journey. And then I find, we see lots of people in our circles, sort of on this online sphere we're a part of, who are now attracted towards orthodoxy or Catholicism, these sort of deep rooted traditional churches with, architecture and beauty, as a sense of, sort of as, and then this is of course also connected often in many cases to the sort of culture wars we've been describing, where it's like, look at what modernity has done. It's given us this uprooted culture. It's, the sort of advertising and glitzy screens and all of this, and this sort of uproots us from our tradition. And so there's this movement back towards Catholicism with its rich tradition and liturgy, and so these people sort of feel attracted to that, but it's often tied up with I think a bit of a potentially one-sided rejection of modernity as just sort of this completely negative force, and not seeing, it's also brought many things you would see as positive. It's brought freedom and so on. And so I think there's intrinsically there a sort of, how would you put it, sort of attraction towards something like maybe the more traditional forms of mass. And where was I going to go with this? But I think another piece of this is, because these things are happening in these online spheres, and because people are sort of getting catechized and attracted to Catholicism through people like Taylor Marshall online and so on, there's sort of this connection being made between, Taylor Marshall sort of will point out, look at all of the failures of the church, look at these clown masses, look at the corruption of the church, look at the sexual abuse scandal. And then he'll have this wonderful little narrative of, we have this story, we can sort of trace it all the way back to Vatican II, and there's this sort of good group within the church that have been resisting this all along. And if only we could root out all of this corruption, get back to the pure church, we would have, resistance to modernity, and we would have, we would be on the good side of things. And part of this is also just connected to, I was just struck by this during the election season. It's just connected also to this major mistrust of institutions, where, the sort of, I don't know how representative Taylor Marshall is of the sort of traditionalist tribe, but if you look at the sort of narrative he's telling, it's sort of like, you can't trust the media, you can't trust the government because, this whole, Trump has had the election stolen from him. It's this cabal, this deep state that's behind this. And you can't trust the church either, because there's this deep state that's sort of pulling the strings. And what you're left with is sort of this nihilistic mistrust of institutions. There's nothing you can trust. And sort of the only thing you can hold on to is the narrative Taylor Marshall is telling you. And in the face of all of this corruption, you just really want to have something firm to hold on to. You want to hold on to there must be somewhere this pure group of good people that I can be a part of. that I can trust. And so I think those are sort of all maybe some of the moving parts that attract people towards these movements. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think that indeed Taylor Marshall and others capitalized a lot on those feelings. It's reassuring to have those feelings, but the problem is that it's also so external, you know. It comes from the outside. It's like I cannot comprehend the world. I cannot comprehend the church. So I cannot understand it. So something must be wrong with the church. Something must be wrong with the world. And since I cannot find anyone else that validates me, here comes Taylor Marshall and some other person who is telling me that, no, you've been right all along. Those are the ones who are wrong. If you don't understand it, it's because you are good and they are evil. And yeah, that's something reassuring. But what Pope Francis is asking of us, and it's something that he constantly says, he is challenging us. And being a Catholic or being a Christian for that matter, is being challenged. Okay, love your enemy. Who could have gone with that, you know? Or being chaste, not or not go with the whole world, not try to have a virtuous life. That's hard. And someone who is born into this modern culture does not arrive at those conclusions easily. Okay, so the problem is these people who are following Taylor Marshall and like-minded people, they assume, okay, I follow some certain set of precepts that no one else follows. So by default, I must be orthodox. So if something challenges me, something I don't understand, then the problem is outside of me. But we are constantly growing, okay? It's not because I adhere to a teaching of the church that is rejected by the whole world. It's not because of that suddenly I do not get to be challenged anymore, that I do not get to change anymore my perceptions, okay? So a person needs to try to change to fit the church teachings. That's and this will happen until the end of our days, and even until the end of our days, the devil is there to tempt us. Okay, so I think those people are getting this warm, fuzzy feeling from Taylor Marshall, which is actually quite interesting because that's what they reject on the others. Michael Voris, another critic of the church, goes against the Church of Nice, the Church of Warm, Fuzzy Feelings, but they are getting these warm, fuzzy feelings also from Taylor Marshall. And they don't even understand that. That's the danger. I think that people need to be open to the possibility that they might not understand something, but that's part of life. It's good to go for structure. Many people who convert go for structure. What they want a structure, they want rules, they want to know. Okay, that's all well and good, but in the end, it's a religion. It has faith. It has mystery. You cannot grasp everything on this side of eternity.
Can I just say that I like Mike Lewis's analogy of that gas tank Catholicism. Yeah, that Andreas brought up. Thank you, Andreas, for bringing that up, because that's exactly how I used to think about confession. Like I'm a motorsports enthusiast, and I just thought when I entered the confessional, it's like me having a pit stop and getting new tires, more fuel, so that I can continue. Like grace is this, and this, and I find that a lot of critics of Pope Francis and his defenders are going to say that, you know what, the Orthodox Catholics don't think like this. Pope Francis and his defenders are setting up straw men. But you know what? I look at Pope Francis and I like hear Mike Lewis's argument, and like, hey, that hit me like straight into the heart. Right? The Gaston Catholicism, the contemporary Pelagianism in Gaudete and et Exsultate, for example. That's me. And a lot of those, like, I don't know. Maybe he's not talking about you guys. Because I'm sure that many traditional Catholics, many people who identify themselves as conservative, are personally in their lives are holier than I am. And I pray that that's the case. But they're talking to someone. And one of those people is myself, right? Like gas and Catholicism is like, someone might see that that's a ridiculous argument. But look, me here, I like cars, I like motorsports. He nailed it. and I feel admonished when I hear that, and like, look, this is your Catholicism. That's not how it's supposed to be, man. And that brings me to the other thing that Pedro brought up, which is people not able to comprehend what the Pope is talking about. A lot of the criticism of him, they might say that, hey, those guys who are calling the popes heretics, they're sedevacantists, those are crazy guys. But you know what? His teaching really is confusing. There's a lot of ambiguity in it. That's what they might say, right? And right before I had this conversation, I actually had chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia on my computer, and I was reading it, and I was like, okay, so let me state the position of the critics of Amoris chapter 8 first, lest I don't misrepresent them, right? And we actually had someone, and I'm just gonna quote from what he said. We actually had someone else in the community who we invited on this conversation. He's actually a Catholic priest, so he identifies himself as a like moderate traditionalist who's not with the like anti-Francis how did he put it, anti-Francis rage machine, right? So here's what he said. The main issue moderate traditionalists like myself have with Pope Francis is that he contradicts the previous tradition and magisterium on the matter of communion for the divorced and remarried. And then he quotes Familiaris Consortio 84. However, quote, the Church reaffirms her practice, which is based on sacred scripture, of not admitting to the Eucharistic communion divorced persons who have remarried. They have unable to be admitted thereto from the fact that their state and condition objectively contradict that union of love between Christ and the Church, which is signified and effected by the Eucharist. Besides this, there is another special pastoral reason. If these people were admitted to the Eucharist, the faithful would be led into error and confusion regarding the Church's teaching about the indissolubility of marriage. Unquote. The traditionalist argument is that the practice of giving communion to those who have divorced and remarried and are not living as brother and sister has already been condemned, and Pope Francis is in grave error where he encourages it. There's also a lot of silly anti-Francis stuff generated by the traditionalist rage machine, which I do not condone. Right. So that's what he said. Thank you, credit to Father Eric Seitz, right? So for that quotation. So okay, one thing I will say about chapter 8, the way I understand it, is that I didn't really find a lot of ambiguity in it, right? And then the criticism would come back saying that, oh, some people see it this way, some people see it that way, therefore it's confusing and controversial, right? And I think confusion and ambiguity is honestly a rather facile and convenient way to dismiss a genuinely challenging issue. Because at the start of Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis says outright, look, chapter 8 is going to be difficult. Right. But one thing, how should I put it? Okay, let me backtrack a little bit and go to this Familiaris Consortia, paragraph 84. And that last part where St. John Paul II, pray for us. I'll read it again. It says that there's another special pastoral reason. If these people were admitted to the Eucharist, the faithful will be led into error and confusion regarding the Church's teaching about the indissolubility of marriage. Reading this now in the year 2020, it sounds rather quaint to say that admitting people to communion would lead people to error and confusion because everybody's doing it and nobody has any idea of what the heck they're doing. So the horse is out of the stable, the cat is out of the barn. I'm mixing my metaphors now. So, but you get the idea. It's already there, and so what we need to do is we have to get the cat back in the bag. Well, it's not going to happen, right? So, and then going back to the chapter 8, and this is where I genuinely am confused as to where the confusion is, because when I read it, and I'll quote straight from it, okay, and I think it's in. Let me see. I should have highlighted that passage so I can find it. Oh, there you go. This is in paragraph 295, right? This is not a, quote, gradualness of law, unquote, but rather a gradualness in the prudential exercise of free acts on the part of subjects who are not in a position to understand, appreciate, or fully carry out the objective demands of the law. And this is an important part of the way Catholic theology construes sin, especially mortal sin, right? We're Catholics. We like our clear categories, right? And mortal sin, you have to have three elements, right? You have the grave matter, which is like, is it objectively wrong and evil, right? You have to have full knowledge, and you have to have full consent for all of those to be present. And insofar as the critics of Amoris Laetitia are saying that Pope Francis is relaxing this discipline, not changing the doctrine, but insofar as they're saying that they're relaxing the discipline and this will lead people into error, I can see their point, right? Because communion mortal sin, any mortal sin, is that by itself is grave matter, right? So now you have to have the two elements, and I think a lot of the risk with Amoris Laetitia, not just Amoris Laetitia, but the emphasis on mercy, is that it might encourage lazy pastors and lazy people in general to just take this and say that, you know what, this is difficult to solve. This guy doesn't have a free. He doesn't have free will into his situation, and let's just leave it at that. Just go up to communion. And I've seen that happen. And it's not good. Okay, so let's just put it that way. And insofar as the critics of Francis and critics of Amoris Laetitia chapter 8 are saying that, I'm totally on board with them on that. You know, where I am, where I find the challenge is that, okay, so now you have this, and before we started recording, and we were like doing some uh, arm wrestling as to which country is the most Catholic, right? Before this conversation, and Pedro mentioned the, you know, and everyone knows about the cultural Catholic phenomenon. You know, people go to church, they take communion, they might not even go to mass every Sunday. Uh, Never mind divorced and remarried and people in who are like homosexual cohabitation. Never mind those things. Like people who don't go to mass every Sunday. Not going to mass every Sunday is a mortal sin. You should go to confession and before you go to communion. But you're gonna see people there who I don't even see you every Sunday. Just go up and receive. Right. If you're in that situation, you know, and here I find nothing particularly unique or special about Pope Francis's argument. All I see is here's a pastor who's seen so many parishes on the ground as it is, and their congregations for so many years. If you're in this situation, how are you going to start eventually integrating people into the larger richness of the sacramental life? You know, if they only go to mass twice a year, and that's where I see this law of gradualness coming in. It's like, you know, come here, slowly start. You know, we already have all of these lazy pastors who are having people who are excusing all of this behavior already, and all of those lazy Catholics who care not to bother. How do we get them to care? That's how I see this. And he actually, and in Amoris Laetitia, there's actually a paragraph 294 that specifically talks about how, and this is a big thing in the Philippines. I know I have a lot of friends who don't get married in church. A lot of them just go to City Hall and get married before the judge, and then start living together. Because there's a high cultural expectation to, if you're getting married in church, you have to throw a big party, and it's going to be like lavish and expensive. And you know, when I told my wife, hey, let's, you know, when I proposed to my wife and I told her, you know, the only criteria I have, it has to be in church. And my wife's family is more devout than mine. Again, no character judgment on either side. It's just the background. And she was so shocked that I would even mention that as a thing. And I had to explain to her that, well, you know, I have a lot of friends who aren't married in church. They've been like they've been living together. They have 3 kids. They've been together for 7 years. And only now they're sorting out their church wedding because they finally have the what they believe to be the financial capacity to do so. Because it's not just throwing a big party, but you have to have the nice honeymoon as well, you know. And they know about the sacrament. A lot of them will say that, you know what, this situation is wrong, but we can't help it. We really want our marriage to be recognized in the eyes of God, but there's no money. You know, and this is the sort of thing that when you live in that conservative Catholic, and gosh, I'm going to get a lot of flack for the way I'm going to phrase this, because like I said, those guys have a point. But look, most parishes in the world don't look like a TLM congregation where all of the people there are already they're all like, let's just say, doing everything by the book and have like the uh, seven nicely dressed and well behaved kids. And again, I'm not when I'm saying this, I'm not criticizing the the traditionalists for getting into that. And insofar as they really are living out the vision of uh, a Catholic life, having your family raised in the faith, more power to them, right? But then there are all of these other places out there where it's a total mess. How do you start sorting that out? And this is where I see Pope Francis's law of gradualness come in. It's like, get people into church first and then sort them out. If the very first thing that you do to them is they come to you and you say that, you know what, you're excommunicated because you're objectively in sin. Well, not excommunicated, but because excommunication is another thing. But don't come to mass because, or no, not don't come to mass, don't come to communion because if you start off with that, then how are you going to hook them in, right? Where I see Pope Francis is trying to get at is trying to find those um, those holds, those grasping points for people who like may not have been in church for many years, or are just sort of doing it reflexively as part of their culture and upbringing. Yeah, how do you address that, especially when like 90% of the congregation is already like that?
I mean, distilling that to a point, maybe it's that this issue is what it means to be pastoral, and it's like this fight between doctrinal and pastoral, and I think there is the fear of the pastoral overriding the doctrinal. But I mean, as Pope Francis says, realities are greater than ideas. So how much how do you relegate that? Because you do have you made the great point about once about recently about Pope Francis not being this monarch type pope, but a pastor, like a small church pastor. And I guess and that's where like these how do you say, this friction, these points of friction come in between these approaches, and through the frictions that the critics of Pope Francis want to address, or make them criticize for Pope Francis.
Well, yes, all of what was said is very good. I fully understand the chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia as Carlos has interpreted it. I would just like to precisely point out how this is the root of this dichotomy that I mentioned before. There are those who have this idea that something is wrong, so it must be completely shunned. You are in remarriage after a divorce, so either you stop having sexual intercourse with that person, or you're completely banned from the church, and I need to always be telling you that you should stop, And there's on the other side the people adopt Pope Francis' approach, which is, okay, you're not living fully according to the church, but I'm going to try to bring you in because there's some interest in you. You're here in this church, you're here talking to this priest. So there's something there. So I'm going to take that and try to make the most out of it, and especially try to bring you gradually into the full communion with the church. And if there is a way through which I can give you the sacraments in a way that does not contradict doctrine, I'm going to find that, because according to Catholic doctrine, the sacraments provide you the grace to fight against sin. Now, I would like to also address Familiaris Consortio. It actually proves what I was saying. Catholic doctrine has a lot good emphasis on continuity. But there are some people who misconstrued what this continuity is all about. Continuity is on the doctrinal level, it's on the teaching. Pope Francis did not contradict any teaching. Remarriage after divorce continues to be wrong, continues to be considered adultery in Catholic doctrine. People who are in mortal sin cannot receive communion. That's also doctrine. Everything that is doctrinal, Pope Francis didn't touch on that. Pope Francis touched on a discipline. And discipline is how we apply doctrine to practical circumstances. Whether a certain group that is not in mortal sin can receive the Eucharist or not depends on some circumstances. Namely, will they provide scandal to the other members of the congregation? At the time of John Paul II, of Familiaris Consortio, maybe yes. But nowadays, as Carlos said, the cat is already out of the bag. Many people are completely unaware of what the church teaching on marriage or even the Eucharist is. So the idea that people might get scandalized maybe nowadays is not as strong. So how do we apply the doctrine to this practical situation? Maybe now we can have a more a different discipline. And while doctrines cannot contradict each other, disciplines can. Disciplines can. How we apply doctrine to this practical situation can lead, according to my discernment of this particular situation, to two different practices, as long as the teaching is the same. Now, I have written an article for Where Peter Is, which is basically talks about this. Does Amoris Laetitia contradict Familiaris Consortio? And what Familiaris Consortio says is, what Familiaris Consortio says is, as it was quoted, the church reaffirms her practice. A practice is a discipline. A practice is subject to revision. Of course, this practice is based upon sacred scripture. There is no doubt about it, but that does not mean that it's the only practice that is possible. And what Carlos said, mortal sin includes the three components. That's also doctrine. That's traditional doctrine. John Paul II himself says that this doctrine goes back to Council of Trent. I think it actually goes even back to St. Thomas Aquinas. So, yeah, the practice from John Paul II was based on sacred scripture, was based on doctrine. This practice is also, the practice of Amoris Laetitia is also based on doctrine. It's also based on sound doctrine. So the circumstances have changed. The truth of the faith did not, but how we apply this truth of the faith may change. And this exists in manuals from before the council. Even there's online a New Advent Encyclopedia from the time of Pius X. It's there. Disciplines can contradict each other.
That's because the culture contradicts itself at different points in time.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Or basically, there's a time to fight the culture and be rigorous, But there's a time when, okay, the culture already changed. Now we want to salvage as much people that are wandering the sea of confusion as we can. Of course, this practice has dangers, the laxity, the moral laxity that you mentioned, but the other practice also has dangers. The danger of having a divorced and remarried person who is trapped on a difficult and complex situation, going to the church, finds only judgmentalism, and then leaves. That's also a danger for that specific soul. So, of course, there's pros and cons for both, but what matters is both are legitimate. What is not legitimate is to take our prudential evaluation of the pros and cons of each approach and then say, oh, the Pope is a heretic, or the Pope is not, or finding all possible excuses to say this was not magisterial, or this magisterial document is not authoritative. This is where things start to get unacceptable from a Catholic point of view.
I have a question about surrounding Morris. Is part of what the Pope is recommending by admitting people who have divorced into communion, is that sort of a required, or does he sort of say, you know, if you don't, if you aren't sort of comfortable with this, if you think this is not the way the church in your location should go, you're free to sort of maintain the traditional stance, or is this sort of something he wants to roll out across the church?
Well, my interpretation is that Pope Francis wants things to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. There are people who probably may benefit from the previous discipline, which actually is the safer one. People are not committing sin. But if to bring people to that part, we can take advantage of this new pastoral route, it's available. It's not a matter of saying, oh, you can keep the old one or you have to use the new one. No. Each situation is different. A pastor, an Orthodox pastor, but who cares for these souls, must see in each situation what is the best approach. And the Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon here in Portugal actually provided some very good guidelines. He created kind of a hierarchy of things. First thing that they may try is to get an annulment. If they cannot, they must try to live as brother and sister, which was what Familiaris Consortium proposed. If it's not possible, then the approach from Familiaris Amoris Laetitia, try to see if they are in mortal sin or not in mortal sin. There's always grave matter, but there might not also always be full knowledge. And most importantly, something that people who are traditional minded sometimes forget, full consent. They tend to reduce the mitigating circumstances to full knowledge, and then they say, oh, it's just a matter of telling the person that this is a problem solved. Oh, there's also the full consent part of the picture. This a marriage or a remarriage does not work just by one. There's another partner that might not be interested in fulfilling these obligations, and there might be children or other dependent people. It's not that it's right to pursue the sin of adultery, but sometimes a person may not give the full consent. Giving full consent is not just, being raped. No. Anything that makes, I wanted to do this, but I can't. There's something curtailing my freedom. This mitigates the full consent, therefore mitigates the mortal sin. It's not mortal sin, so a person can come to the Eucharist and get spiritual strength from the grace that the Eucharist gives.
This really reminds me of the recent civil marriage controversy, where, as I was reading the coverage on where Peter is, and I think Austin Ivory's excerpt, he was pointing out that part of what was motivating this was this sort of reaction against this sort of top-down, here's the policy all across the world, no matter what the political situation is, you need to oppose, like civil marriage isn't something the church can be behind. Like we have to impose it sort of unilaterally. And then, this sort of frustrates, you see this sort of in Francis's context. He wants to sort of, stop same-sex marriage by making a compromise on civil unions. And so this sort of reminds me of this situation where you're sort of saying this is sort of now, that you sort of assess the pastoral situation, and then you sort of pick the best option for this particular person, this particular situation. And it strikes me that the conservatives and the liberals are both sort of caught in the reality, the ideas being greater than reality, right? It's the liberal who wants to say, let's just unilaterally admit everyone into communion, no matter what's going on in their personal life. And that's obviously not going to lead people into holiness. And the other side is just saying, let's just clamp down on this rule, and there's just no possible exceptions. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but it just strikes me there's, once again, Pope Francis sort of being a pragmatist. Carlos always talks about how he's a conservative pragmatist. Maybe he could unpack that for you.
Oh, gosh, where do I start? You know what? I'm actually less worried about the conservatives and the trads with Pope Francis. What I'm more worried about are the people who perceive themselves as like on the liberal side or as to be on the program, right? Because then what happens is that it's precisely that, look, if let's say the matter of the Eucharist and your married state is not a big deal, there would be absolutely 0 point for Pope Francis to even bring up the law of gradualness. Because where are we? Gradualness means like we're slowly working on something. If it's just that, okay, there's nothing to do with your situation, just go to communion, there's no gradualness there. And that's just being like lazy and, and my worry is a lot of these, and I'm not so much worried for Pope Francis per se, but I'm more worried about these pastors and how our Lord is going to hold them accountable. If they look at Amoris Laetitia and says that, you know what, Pope Francis confirms me in all of my biases, I will just carry on with business as usual. And it's the same worry that I have with the conservatives, with John Paul II and Pope Benedict. If you don't find any of these teaching challenging, at least with the trads, they're finding this challenging and they're wrestling with it, right? And what I'm more worried about the people who consider themselves aligned with Francis, because again, there's this like Pedro mentioned earlier, there's this good guys us, bad guys them mentality or dynamic, that the moment you start considering yourselves as part of being the good guys, you're done. Right? You have to tread very carefully, and again, a lot of the damning with faint praise criticism that I see with Pope Francis is that he's not introducing anything new, or Pope John Paul II said it better, or all of those things. But he's there. I mean, we as Catholics believe that the Holy Spirit influences the election of the Pope. And so there's a reason why the Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was elected Pope Francis, right? There's a reason for that. And in my own, I can only speak for myself because I'm not a pastor. I'm not divorced and remarried, I'm just a regular guy. And even in situations where we don't have mortal sin, like I mentioned this in the chat, that we had in the Bridges of Meaning Discord. and I'm going to get a little personal here if you guys don't mind. I have this recurring argument with my wife where it just escalates into a major fight. And it happened recently. And every time that happens, she's going to cry. I feel angry, and at the same time, I feel like a massive idiot for allowing it to get to that situation. And that recurring, without getting too much into specifics, that recurring fight that we have, I have got it down into a science wherein she says one specific thing, and then which is, she says one specific thing, and then I react in a disproportionate way such that it escalates into a full-blown fight. And it happened like a dozen times before. I've gotten it down to a science. The most recent time I apologized to her about it. I said that, I know exactly what I'm doing wrong here. Please bear with me. You have no, unlike in the previous instances, I will not ascribe any malice on your part as to why we had this fight. It's all on my end. I've got it down to a science. It's this thing. I think it's like tiny, tiny, tiny little thing. It's not even a mortal sin. I know exactly what it is with laser accuracy, and I still keep doing it. So, and then it's quaint, when you mentioned that, you know what, you should just let them know about the doctrine, and then and this is where Pope Francis really struck me with the new Pelagianism thing. It's like, look, like that tiny, 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 tiny little thing. You need grace to address that, because even you in your human capacity, in my human capacity, where I already found that little thing, even I couldn't remove it. Right. So yeah, I mean, if it, I'm where am I going with this? I like Pope Francis. I like the way he teaches, because I feel that a lot of the things that he has said and written during the time of his papacy, I feel like he could have signed my name on it at the end, at the beginning, "Dear Carlos," and I feel like it could have been addressed to me. Look, okay, it might not have been a new thing. It might not even be it. I mean, I like in this way, Pope Francis is, continuing with the tradition when he's not introducing anything new. In fact, he does this all the time. Pope Paul VI said this. Pope John Paul II said that. Pope Benedict XVI said this. He keeps referring back to his predecessors all the time. And that's one of the things that I really like about him, and I think he's not given enough credit for. Or yeah, or if he's given credit for it, it's a bit of a like damn with faint praise sort of credit. But he speaks to me, and maybe he's not talking about you. Maybe he's not talking about you, but he's talking about somebody. There's at least one person out there. There's 1.3 billion Catholics in the world, and you know what our Lord Jesus Christ said about that one lost sheep. Just one, okay, just one. And it frustrates me, all of this culture war talk, because how many people are out there, who even with all of this fighting going on, going to go straight to, okay, what did Pope Francis actually say? Hey, that sounds like me. And then that and this is Mike Lewis's analogy, not Pope Francis's. The gas tank confession, like, yeah, that's me. And so that's what I like about him, and that's what I found, Andreas mentioned that he's actually worried that he agrees with Pope Francis all the time. Yeah, you better worry. So, it's, if you find yourself agreeing with the Pope all the time, and which is why I said that I'm more worried about the people who perceive themselves to be liberals than the trads and the conservatives, because at least they're wrestling with it in some way.
I'm also I agree with most of what you said, but I am quite concerned with this so-called conservatives, because it's like this: liberals are going to be liberals, okay? They want to change the church according to their perspective, and they will use the Pope if it advances their agenda. If the Pope ceases to be useful, they will just pile on him. The conservatives are usually people who, on the previous pontificates, were painted as heralds of orthodoxy in a fallen world. And by doing this, they have the means of communication on a very vast virtual world, and they can send their message in a way that the Vatican clumsiness in these things does not have the same reach, okay? So many people who are rediscovering the faith, what they do? They're going to Google, they're going to research online, and these are the websites that they're going to get. It's not as innocuous as it seems, because underneath this layer of tradition, there are very anti-traditional and anti-Catholic arguments. I'm talking about this idea that, oh, it's not infallible, so I can just reject this teaching. That's completely wrong. There's several pre-conciliar and conciliar and post-conciliar documents rejecting this idea that, oh, you just should assent to what is infallible, or this idea that, oh, this idea that, oh, this is just prudential judgment, or the Pope can bind the faithful in heresy. Those things are profoundly anti-traditional, profoundly anti-Catholic, I would even say. And they are spreading this. This Catholicism that they are promoting is filled with dissent, at least with a seed of dissent, because they're saying you can dissent on the Pope if the Pope teaches something. This is not the way the Catholic operates. So I'm very concerned with them, because if these are the people who knew their faith, how are we going to spread the faith to those who do not know it? You talk about, and I agree with you, liberals are going to use this new strategy of Amoris Laetitia to advance laxism with the sacraments. Yes, you're perfectly right. But before Francis, these conservatives would be trying to clear up the misunderstanding. They would write in apologetics saying, no, the Pope did this is the right way to interpret the Pope. And now what they are doing is precisely feeding the liberal perspective. They are saying Amoris Laetitia does indeed allow this liberal thing, this liberal perspective, which it does not. But if you tell them that it does not, they get angry. This is confusing, this is ambiguous, Yours is just one interpretation among many, blah, blah, blah. They get angry at it. So they're not clarifying, they're adding to the confusion, and they are adding it in the liberal way. And then they say, yes, Amoris Laetitia is liberal, so you don't need to hear the Pope on that regard. And then the liberals are going to say, oh, so I don't need to hear the Pope. So it's a double shot. They shoot themselves in the foot twice. So yes, I am very concerned with this movement. It's not as innocuous as it seems. There were during John Paul II's papacy and Benedict XVI's papacy, we slowly built a structure of Catholicism in social media, and now with Francis, this structure has turned against the church to promote things that can be used by the liberals. It's a mess. It's a mess. These conservatives should be in the front line telling people, Amoris Laetitia means this. And since it means this, it cannot be used in this liberal sense, and it is in continuity with previous doctrine, and the Pope is reliable. They should be the ones doing this, and instead they are the first undermining this. This is bad.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying that it's not harmful. Okay, and I guess I might be giving them, I might be giving, you know, wait, how should I put it? Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and say that one thing along those lines that you mentioned, Pedro, that I do find alarming is that there are a lot of these Catholic apologists, especially again, Andreas mentioned the Anglosphere, right? Because it seems to be, if not an American phenomenon, English-speaking internet phenomenon, where a lot of the apologists a lot of them actually helped me rediscover the faith back in the late 2000s and stuff. Gosh, where am I going with this? A lot of them are now saying that, oh, what happens with John Paul II Catholics now that Francis is the Pope? And I'm like, look, John Paul II is just a man. You know, at the end of the day, we're all Jesus Christ Catholics. You know, and I don't see, and then suddenly we now have this dichotomy of, oh, we're John Paul II Catholics, we're Benedict Catholics, you know, and you know these and it's now a Francis world. And like, well, yeah, it's that, it's like that, yeah. I find that baffling, honestly. I think we lost Pedro.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I may start losing battery in my laptop. Yeah, we've been going here for about for an hour and a half now. Do you guys have anything else to add? Because I'm not gonna stop talking.
Why don't we, Pedro, if you have any battery left, why don't we wrap things up by, I'd love to go around the room and see the ways in which Pope Francis has impacted your own faith in a positive way. I think Carlos already talked about this. Maybe he has something else to share, but Pedro, could you?
Yeah, first of all, let me just ask, are you receiving me well? Because I think that my laptop is starting to lose battery and I might have disconnected.
Yep, he just lost connection.
Now, but okay. Yes. It is my laptop that is starting to fail. But I'll try to I'll try to be quick. So what's happening is, regarding your question, yes, Pope Francis has impacted my faith in a very positive way. I am a person who converted to Catholicism due to the writings of Benedict XVI, and even today, I am a Ratzingerian. Benedict XVI is my favorite Pope of my life. And Pope Benedict is a Pope of high intellectual prowess, a Pope of structure, the structure that we talked about. And hello?
We can still hear you.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Let me try to. Okay. And so Pope Francis brought me not to reject my Ratzingerian roots, but to give them proper balance, so that I would know that, yes, there's truth, but truth must be concrete. And Benedict also talks about that in Caritas in Veritate, but Francis brings that message home more strongly. And I think that it also gives me the value of discernment. Just by telling me you have to discern things. Only that allows me to have the humility to see, yes, the church has doctrinal truth, but I need prudence in the way I apply it in practice. And most especially, I must be guided towards the concreteness of the situation of my brother and sister to actually help them and apply the truth in a way that will help them. It's not just a matter of, oh, I am right and you are sinners. Oh. It's not a stone you throw at other people. It's a greater communion with God. And that's what it's all about. And that's what I learned with Pope Francis. I don't know if you could get everything from what I said.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay. It's really starting to get bad over here with the connection and everything.
So maybe one last question to everybody. What's your favorite encyclical by Pope Francis?
For me, I am torn between Amoris Laetitia and Fratelli Tutti.
Those are the two most controversial ones, aren't they?
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, Fratelli Tutti is better on general, but Amoris Laetitia has this magnificent chapter where it dissects the hymn to love from St. Paul, and that is just magnificent. There's nothing that Pope Francis has did that equal that. So if we're going on the specifics, Amoris Laetitia has a part that is the best, but on general, I prefer Fratelli Tutti.
Hey, while I have all you Catholics here, I've been wanting to dig into Christian sexual ethics, and I was having my eye on, John Paul II's theology of the body. Would Amoris Laetitia be a good thing to add to the book pile, and what else? I think Ratzinger has written some stuff on this, right? Any recommendations?
Deus Caritas Est.
Okay. Yeah, okay, good. Is that by Benedict or Ratzinger?
Benedict.
Okay. Thanks.
It's
Great.
his first encyclical as Pope, I think.
Okay, great. My favorite encyclical. I recently started. So I read Amorous. No, I haven't read Amorous. I read Laudato Si, and I just loved the section on his biblical exegesis for a theology of creation. I just found that really, really well done. And he has this chapter heading where he just says the gaze of Jesus. And I just found that so profound in thinking of creation care as a Christian is the contrast between this sort of consumeristic, mammonistic, desiring, lustful gaze on creation that's sort of behind a lot of the environmental denigration we see, and this loving gaze of the Creator God upon the world He has created. I just think there's something so profound there about our perceptions and our imaginations and how we just lovingly gaze at the world and do not seek to colonize it, but instead just gaze with love. I just so I'm just pulling so much out of this little chapter heading in Laudato Si. But yeah. Andreas, how about you?
Now, I nearly haven't read all of them, but my favorite so far is Gaudete et Exsultate. It's apart from those the neo-Gnosticism and the neo-Pelagianism he gets into. There's a small little chapter in the beginning where he makes an example of a woman going through her daily life on how to achieve holiness, like she's standing among her peers, which are discussing and starting to gossip, and she will say to herself, "No, I will not start to gossip." And then she goes home, she reads to her kids or listens to her kids while even though she's tired because she worked all day. And it was just a little example in the beginning of the encyclical, and I thought it was really touching. It was this perfect slice of small time holiness, basically.
Nice, it's beautiful. How about you, Carlos? I think you're a fan of Laudato Si as well, aren't you?
Yeah. So yeah, and I want to echo Andreas on well, before I directly answer that question, because the question is, what's your favorite? I would say piece of writing, because not all of them are encyclicals technically.
True.
Yeah, Gaudete et Exsultate is great, and it's again, it's a it's like straight out of another Francis in the church, Saint Francis de Sales, in his introduction to the devout life, where he just keeps discussing all of these things about how to like holiness in like little bits of your ordinary life. So I like that, and again, I got hit like straight into the heart, like I mentioned, with that whole discussion on Pelagianism. As far as my bank account is concerned, the one that has the most impact to me is Laudato Si, because we acquired this house that you can see behind me in the background in 2017, and I made many improvements to it to basically just make it a lot more shall we say, appropriate to the Philippine setting and climate. Because there were a lot of patchwork improvements to it done to it over the years, which were not very good for lighting, air circulation, and all of those other practical things, right? So I'm like, hey, I'm going to make this house. It was just really uncomfortable to begin with, but I might as well like go all in and do all of the improvements to make it like more harmonious with with the environment. So I spent a lot of money there. And I even had there was an air conditioner right there. I had it removed thanks to paragraph 47. you know, so, of Laudato Si. That controversial paragraph about the air conditioning, it's gone. I mean, I have air conditioning in some of the other rooms, but that particular one, I replaced it with a big ceiling fan. Right? You see there? But the nice thing about it is that I followed the, you know, so I'm an engineer. I think like an engineer as well. So I had the skylight installed here, so it's sunnier. With more people in the house than the previous owners, we only consume half to 1/3 of the electricity that they used to consume. So Laudato Si has had a big impact on my pocketbook. But my favorite is Christus Vivit. So it's totally left field from. I don't see a lot of commentary on it, but when I read it, it's like every paragraph was like he nailed it. And gosh, there were some paragraphs there where I just went, oh my gosh, the Pope totally nails it with his criticism of, let's say, the way elderly people don't transmit their wisdom now and only like try to appropriate from the youth what is properly theirs. But then I'm getting older too. I have small kids that are starting to grow up really fast, and once you start having kids, you realize how fast they grow up. But then that piece of writing goes back to me and says that, am I being the person that I used to be? Am I growing up to be the person that I used to criticize? Right? And so there's hardly a piece of Francis writing that has not like sort of in some way hit me directly. But then I would say Christus Vivit is my favorite, because then I'm now in that transition period where, you know, I'm not so young anymore. I'm 32, so I'm not exactly too old, but you know, I've got kids and they can see that, okay, they're growing up fast, and I'm sure I'm ruining them in some way. But at the same time, like the Pope says in Amoris Laetitia, you know, how you have to let your children surprise you. So yeah, Christus Vivit. that totally left field choice. I don't see a lot of commentary on it, which I think is unfortunate, but that spoke to me very personally.
Okay, it's fascinating how many different encyclicals came up here. Everyone has a different one. I think that just about wraps this up. Really nice talking to you, Pedro, and thanks for giving us some of your time. And do keep up the prolific writing over at where Peter is. We're reading a lot of the stuff you guys produce and enjoying it and getting a lot out of it. So all the best.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Yep. So good night, everyone.
Good night.
Who knows what time it is at your place?
It's 7 in the morning. So my window used to be dark when we started. So now the sun is up.
It's 5:00 p.m. over here.
11 p.m.
12, I win. I have to go to bed.
Okay.
Good night and good morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
This was fun.
Hey guys, see you. Bye.
Goodbye.